My name is Margaret Cole, and at 62 years old, I walked across a college stage in a navy gown to collect my bachelor's degree. Not a master's, not a PhD, just the degree I had promised myself I would finish before life got in the way. It had taken me 9 long years of night classes, early morning shifts at the diner, and holidays spent writing essays while the rest of the world was drinking eggnog or watching fireworks. In my head, the day I graduated would be the day my family finally saw me, not just as mom or grandma, but as someone who had her own dreams and had fought to reach them. I had reserved 7 seats months in advance. 7 bright blue chairs near the front of the auditorium, where I could see the faces that mattered most: my son Daniel, my daughter Grace, their spouses, and 3 grandchildren. I imagined their waves, their clapping, their shouts of "Go, Grandma," as I crossed the stage. But when the dean called, "Margaret Cole," those 7 seats stared back at me like a row of empty picture frames. I smiled for the crowd of strangers, diploma folder in hand, and kept walking as if nothing inside me had cracked. For decades, I had been the dependable one. Married at 19, raising 2 children while working double shifts. Shelving my own ambitions because someone always needed lunch money, a ride to soccer, or a last-minute science project done. My late husband, Peter, used to tell me, one day, "It'll be your turn." When he died unexpectedly, the house went quiet, and for the first time in years, my schedule belonged only to me. That's when I went back to school. It wasn't easy. My hands ached after long shifts, my eyes burned from late-night readings, but I pressed on. Daniel once joked, "You're probably the oldest undergrad in the state." And Grace laughed along, not knowing how much it stung. I thought they understood. I thought they were proud. 3 weeks before graduation, Daniel called casually, "Mom, the annual community cookout is the same day as your ceremony. The kids have been looking forward to it for months. Maybe we can celebrate another time." 2 days later, Grace said something similar. Her in-laws were flying in for a big barbecue. She'd try to make it, but couldn't promise. The word "try" stuck to me like wet clothing. On the morning of my graduation, I put on the navy dress I'd bought just for this day. I fastened the gold bracelet Peter had given me on our last anniversary. I told myself, they'll surprise me. They'll walk in just in time. They didn't. After the ceremony, I stood outside with my diploma, watching other graduates drown in hugs and flowers. A kind classmate offered to take my picture. I smiled, but my eyes felt heavy. Later, I saw the photos on Facebook. Daniel at the cookout, Grace with a plate of ribs, my grandkids laughing with cousins. Not one mention of my graduation. That night, I set my diploma on the kitchen counter beside the flowers I'd bought myself. The silence in the house felt louder than any applause. And in that silence, something shifted. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The navy dress from yesterday hung over the back of a chair, the sleeves sagging as if they were as tired as I was. The diploma still sat on the counter where I had left it, next to the gold bracelet I'd taken off before bed. It should have looked like victory, but all I could see was the empty space around it. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. For years, I had told myself that showing up for people was the same as being loved back. I thought my presence at every birthday, every school recital, every hospital visit meant my turn would come too. But yesterday proved something I hadn't wanted to admit. My turn was never coming unless I made it happen for myself. When Daniel called that afternoon, it wasn't to ask about the ceremony. It was to see if I could watch the kids next Saturday. "Just a couple hours, Mom," he said. "We've got tickets to the ball game." In the past, I would have rearranged everything, my errands, my reading, my plans, just to make it work. This time, I said, "I can't. I already have plans." The truth, my plans were nothing more than an afternoon wandering the used bookstore downtown, followed by a quiet lad in the corner cafe. But they were mine, and I wasn't going to trade them away again. Grace was next. 2 days later, She called to float the idea of me hosting Thanksgiving again this year. "It's just easier at your place," she said. "You've got the big kitchen." I took a slow breath and replied, "Why don't we rotate? I think it's your turn this year." There was a pause on the line, like she was adjusting to a new language she hadn't heard before. Then she said, "I guess we could do that." At first, the changes were small. I didn't cancel my book club meetings for last-minute babysitting. I stopped saying yes to every holiday duty. And slowly, I felt something unfamiliar: space. Space to read without guilt. Space to take a walk without feeling I should be somewhere else. Space to notice how tired I had been from carrying everyone's expectations for so long. But there was also tension. Daniel once remarked, "You're really busy these days." "Mom," as though it were a problem. I told him, "Yes, I am, and I like it that way." His expression told me he wasn't sure what to make of this new version of me. The real test came 2 months later. A letter arrived from the college alumni office, inviting graduates to a networking luncheon. My first instinct was to ignore it. Events like that weren't for people like me. But then I thought, why not me? I had earned the same degree as everyone else in that room. I deserved to walk in with my head high, even if my own family hadn't clapped for me that day. I circled the date on my calendar. It was time to see what else could be possible if I stopped living in the empty seats. The alumni luncheon was held at the grand ballroom of the old Fairmont Hotel, the kind of place where crystal chandeliers sparkle even in the daytime and the carpet smells faintly of lemon polish. I arrived early, partly because I didn't want to walk in late, partly because I didn't trust myself not to turn around and go home. The room buzzed with conversation. Men and women in sharp suits clustered in small groups, laughing in the easy way of people who already knew they belonged here. I found my table, table 14, set with white linen, polished silverware, and little name cards folded like origami. Mine looked strangely official, Margaret Cole, class of 2023. I sat down, smoothed my skirt, and tried to pretend I wasn't the oldest graduate in the room. 5 minutes later, someone slid into the seat across from me. He was maybe in his late 60s, tall, with a warm smile and a worn leather briefcase at his side. "Margaret Cole?" he asked, glancing at my name card. "Yes," I said cautiously. "I'm Robert Ellis." "I think I knew your husband. Peter Cole. We worked together years ago at the shipping yard." The mention of Peter's name caught me off guard. It wasn't often a stranger said it anymore. Robert leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Peter used to talk about how smart you were. He always said you could run circles around half the guys in his department if you ever had the chance." I managed a small smile. "That was a long time ago," Robert said. But he was right. "You're here now, aren't you?" The luncheon went on, speeches from the dean, stories from other graduates. But my mind kept drifting back to Robert's words. When dessert came, he asked, "So what's next for you, Margaret? You've got the degree. What's the plan?" I laughed nervously. "I haven't thought that far ahead. I just wanted to finish what I started." He tilted his head, as if weighing whether to say the next part. "Well, I might know someone looking for a part-time consultant. Flexible hours. Good pay. They need someone sharp who understands people, and you strike me as that kind of person." I almost told him I wasn't interested, that I was too old to start something new. But instead, I said, "Maybe we should talk." Walking out of the hotel, I realized my hands were trembling. Not from nerves, but from the strange, exhilarating idea that life might still have doors left for me to open. It felt like the first time in years that my future wasn't just an empty seat waiting for someone else to fill it. This time, I was the one taking the seat. For 2 days, Robert's offer played in my mind like a song I couldn't turn off. Part-time consultant. Flexible hours. Good pay. It sounded almost too generous, especially for someone like me who had been out of the corporate loop for decades. But more than the offer itself, it was the way he'd said it, as though I still had something valuable to give, That Friday, I called him back. We met for coffee at a small place downtown. He explained the role. A mid-sized logistics firm needed someone to improve their client relations, streamline internal communication, and mentor junior staff. Honestly, Robert said, you're perfect for it. You know people, and you don't sugarcoat. That's exactly what they need. I told him I'd think about it over the weekend. But truthfully, my mind was already tilting toward yes. On Saturday, I mentioned it to Daniel while dropping off a casserole at his house. He frowned. Mom, you just finished school. Shouldn't you be taking it easy? Enjoy life. I smiled faintly. Maybe this is my version of enjoying life. He didn't answer right away. It just seemed sudden. And what about helping with the kids? We've all counted on you. There it was, the unspoken truth. I was stepping out of the role they'd grown comfortable with. Grace's reaction wasn't much softer. When I told her over the phone, she sighed. That's great, Mom. But don't overextend yourself. You're not 30 anymore. I bit my tongue. If I'd been 30, no one would have warned me not to overextend. They would have cheered. But at 62, my ambition was suddenly seen as a risk, a threat to the balance they liked. That night, I stood in my living room, looking at the diploma hanging on the wall. I thought about the years I'd given to everyone else's needs. How easy it had been for them to assume I'd keep doing it forever. Maybe they feared that if I took this job, I'd have less time to be the standby babysitter, the holiday host. The fallback plan, they were right. That was exactly the point. On Monday morning, I called Robert. I'll take it, I said. The words felt like turning a key in a long locked door. My first day at the firm felt like stepping onto a moving train. Fast, loud, and headed somewhere I wasn't entirely sure I was ready for. The office was a mix of glass walls and open desks. The kind of place where conversations spilled across the room and phones never stopped ringing. Robert introduced me to the staff as our new consultant, and I caught the surprised glance from a few 20-somethings. I could almost hear them wondering what someone my age was doing here. By the end of the day, I had a stack of notes on recurring client complaints, a plan to reorganize the communication chain, and 2 separate lunch invitations from colleagues who seemed genuinely curious about me. It felt good. No, it felt right. To be using my brain for something more than meal planning and family logistics. At home, though, the atmosphere shifted. Daniel called the next evening. So, how was the new job? He asked, but his tone was off. Polite, careful, like he was asking a stranger about the weather. When I told him it was going well, he said, that's good. Hey, listen, we could really use you this Saturday. It's just for a few hours. I hesitated. I'm sorry. I have a meeting with a client. There was a pause. On a Saturday. Yes, I said firmly. It's important. He didn't argue. But I could hear the disapproval in the silence that followed. Grace's reaction was subtler but sharper. She stopped calling as often. When we did speak, she'd make little comments like, must be nice to have all that energy. Or, I guess you're really in demand now. It sounded like praise, but the edges were sharp enough to cut. 2 weeks into the job, I came home to find a voicemail from Grace. She was just letting me know that they'd planned Thanksgiving without me, assuming I'd be too busy. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, trying to decide whether to be hurt or relieved. In the end, I felt a little of both. Maybe this was the consequence of change. You gained freedom, but you lost the old rhythm, even if that rhythm had been wearing you down. Still, when I walked into the office each morning, coffee in hand, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years' ownership. Not just of my work, but of my life. And for the first time, I wasn't willing to trade it back. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Robert stopped by my desk. We've got a big one, he said, dropping a file thick enough to double as a doorstop. A major client is considering pulling their contract. I want you to take the lead on this. Meetings start Friday and run through the weekend. I flipped through the notes. Miscommunications, delivery errors, a tangle of problems that could cost the firm hundreds of thousands. It was the kind of challenge that made my pulse quicken in the best way. "I'm in," I said without hesitation. That night, I called Daniel to tell him I wouldn't be able to come to Sophie's 10th birthday party on Saturday. The silence on the other end was immediate and heavy. "Mom, you've never missed one of the kids' birthdays." "Not once." "I know," I said softly, "and I'm sorry. But this is important." "So is your granddaughter," he shot back. I closed my eyes. "This doesn't mean I don't care, Daniel. It means I can't be everywhere at once." The next morning, Grace called. Daniel had already told her. Her voice was tight, clipped. "You know, she's been talking about you being there for weeks. She even made you a seat at the table next to hers." I explained about the project, about the stakes, but Grace cut me off. "Sounds like work comes first now." "Got it." The line went dead. By Friday, I'd stopped checking my phone during meetings. Every call or text just made the knot in my stomach tighter. The client meetings were intense. Long hours in a conference room with coffee that tasted like burnt toast. Hashing out solutions, calming tempers. By Sunday night, we had a plan in place, and Robert told me, "You saved this account. The CEO will want to thank you personally." Driving home, I felt a rush of pride, the kind that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. But when I walked into my kitchen, the pride dimmed. On the counter sat a small, neatly wrapped box. The card read from Sophie, "I saved you a piece of cake." Inside was a single slice of chocolate cake, frosting smudged against the lid. I sat down at the table, the same table where I'd stared at my diploma months ago, and realized my life was changing faster than my family was willing to accept. Grace was the one who called it. Dinner. All of us. My place. Sunday at 6. Her tone made it sound less like an invitation and more like a summons. Part of me wanted to say no, just to prove I could. But something in her voice told me that if I didn't go, the gap between us would only get wider. When I arrived, Daniel was already there, sitting stiffly at the table with his arms crossed. Grace's kids ran past me in the hallway, their laughter filling the space in a way that used to feel warm. Now it felt complicated. We started with small talk, weather, traffic, Grace's new kitchen backsplash, but I could feel the real conversation pressing against the edges. It broke when Daniel said, "Mom, we just don't understand why you're different now." "Different how?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "You're always busy. You miss things you never would have missed before," Grace added. "It feels like we're not your priority anymore." I set my fork down. For years, I'd avoided saying what came next, swallowing it in the name of keeping the peace. But peace without honesty is just quiet resentment. "I've spent my whole life making you two my priority," I said. Birthdays, school plays, late-night phone calls, last-minute favors. Every single time I showed up. And somewhere along the way, it stopped being a choice. It became an expectation. Daniel shifted in his chair, but I kept going. "When I went back to school, I thought maybe you'd be proud. Instead, I learned that my milestones mattered less than a cookout or a barbecue." That hurt, more than you probably realize. Grace looked down at her plate. Daniel stared at the wall. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Daniel said quietly, "We didn't think about it that way." "I know," I said, "but here's the thing. I'm not going back to the way it was. I love you both, but I'm not going to disappear into your lives again. I have my own now." The air felt heavy, but also clearer. Whether they accepted it or not, the truth was out. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what that might mean. The week after that dinner, my phone stayed quieter than usual. I'd half expected it. After all, the conversation hadn't ended with hugs and laughter. But the silence felt uneven. Grace texted me first. It was a simple message: "You want to grab coffee next week?" "Just us." I said yes before overthinking it. When we met, she seemed more relaxed, almost relieved. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told me. You're right. I guess I got so used to you being there for everything that I forgot you might want more for yourself. Her words were soft, but they felt like a bridge being rebuilt, plank by plank. Daniel, on the other hand, went the opposite way. A few days later, I learned through Grace, not him, that he'd hosted a Sunday cookout and hadn't invited me. When I asked about it, he shrugged over the phone. Didn't think you'd have time. You're always working now. It was the same tone people use when they want to sound casual, but are really throwing a dart. At work, the contrast between my two worlds grew sharper. Here, I was respected. People sought my advice, valued my experience, thanked me for showing up. At home, with Daniel, it felt like every step I took toward independence pulled me further away from him. One Friday evening, as I was leaving the office, Robert caught up to me. Big news, he said. The CEO wants you to lead a training program next quarter. It's more hours, more visibility, and a real chance to make your mark here. I told him I'd think about it, but deep down I knew I wanted to say yes. The only hesitation was the same one that had haunted me for months. How much further would this push Daniel away? Driving home, I realized something unsettling. For years, I'd made my decisions based on what my family needed from me. Now, even when I was free to choose for myself, I was still measuring my choices against their comfort. And maybe it was time to stop. On Monday morning, I walked into Robert's office and said the words without hesitation. I'll take the training program. His face lit up. Knew you would. We'll make the announcement this week. It's a big step. Margaret, congratulations. For the rest of the day, I felt that rare, electric hum of possibility. This wasn't just another project. It was my chance to shape something lasting, to leave a mark beyond my own small circle. For once, I didn't second-guess myself. That night, just as I was pouring a glass of wine, my phone rang. It was Grace, her voice low and urgent. Mom, it's Daniel. He fell off a ladder in the garage, nothing life-threatening. But he sprained his ankle badly. He's on crutches for at least a month. He asked me to call you. I felt the wine go bitter in my mouth. What does he need? I asked, already knowing the answer. He says it'd be easier if you could help with the kids after school until he's back on his feet. He's struggling to ask, Mom. I think he's trying not to make it sound like an order. For a moment, I stood in the kitchen, caught between two worlds. On one side, the training program, long hours. Intense prep, a team counting on me. On the other, Daniel's need for me to step back into the role I had only recently begun to leave behind. I called him directly. His voice was strained but familiar in that old way, the way it used to be when he'd assume I'd say yes. It's just for a few weeks, Mom. You can do your work thing later. The words landed heavier than I expected. Work thing. As if the life I was building was just a hobby, a side project until my real job, taking care of them, resumed. I told him I'd think about it and hung up. For hours, I sat at my desk, staring at the acceptance packet Robert had given me. Every page seemed to ask the same silent question. Are you willing to risk their approval to keep your own life? When I finally turned off the light, I still didn't have an answer. But I knew that whatever choice I made next would set the tone for the rest of my life. By Thursday morning, my decision was made. I walked into Robert's office before the staff meeting. I'm committed to the training program, I said. I can't step back now. He gave me a knowing nod. Then let's make it count. It wasn't that I didn't care about Daniel. I did. But caring didn't mean surrendering the life I'd fought to build. The old me would have dropped everything without question. The woman standing here now knew that saying yes to him meant saying no to myself. That afternoon, I drove to Daniel's house. He opened the door on his crutches, eyebrows raised like he was expecting me to say I'd changed my mind. I can't do after school every day, I told him before he could speak. I've got commitments at work that I can't walk away from. His face tightened. So work comes first. I shook my head. No, my life comes first. Work is part of it. You're part of it. But you don't get to decide which parts matter. For a moment, the air between us was sharp and heavy. Then his son, Oliver, came running in with a Lego creation in his hands. "Grandma, look!" he beamed. I bent down, admiring every piece. "That's amazing. You'll have to show me how you built it." Daniel watched us quietly, the muscles in his jaw loosening just a little. Before I left, I told him, "I can help twice a week. But the rest, you'll have to figure out." He didn't thank me, but he didn't argue either. It wasn't a victory, not exactly. But it felt like a line had been drawn. And for once, I was the one holding the chalk. Driving home, I thought about the empty seats at my graduation. Maybe they'd never be fully filled the way I once hoped, but I wasn't chasing their applause anymore. I was building something sturdier, respect for myself, and maybe eventually from them. It was a rainy Thursday evening when my phone rang. The screen lit up with Daniel's name. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Our last few conversations had been clipped, transactional. But something in my gut told me to answer. "Mom," he said, his voice taut, "I need your help." Now, my heart clenched. What happened? The babysitter canceled. Grace is stuck in traffic picking up the kids from her in-laws. And I've got to be at an urgent client meeting in 40 minutes. I've called everyone I can think of. No one's available. Can you? I glanced at the stack of training manuals on my desk, the work I'd planned to finish tonight. And then I heard Oliver's voice in the background, calling for his dad. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, I said. When I arrived, Daniel was juggling his crutches, a ringing phone, and 2 restless kids. He handed me a quick, "Thank you," without meeting my eyes, then hobbled out the door. For the next 3 hours, I played board games, reheated leftover spaghetti, and read Where the Wild Things Are twice. When Daniel came back, the kids were asleep and the house was quiet. He leaned on the doorframe, watching me pack up my bag. "I didn't think you'd say yes," he admitted. "I almost didn't," I said, meeting his gaze. "But helping you tonight was a choice, not an expectation." Something in his expression shifted, less defensive, more thoughtful. "Yeah, I get that," he said quietly, "and I appreciate it." It wasn't a grand apology or a tearful reunion, but it was the first time in months I'd heard sincerity in his voice without the edge of entitlement. Driving home through the rain, I realized that maybe change wasn't about one big breakthrough. It was about small moments where the old pattern cracked just enough to let something new grow. 2 weeks after that rainy night, things between Daniel and me felt lighter. He'd started calling for reasons other than asking for help. Small updates about the kids, a funny photo from Oliver's art class, even a recipe he thought I might like. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like the temperature between us had shifted from cold to cautiously warm. At work, the training program I'd been leading was wrapping up with better results than anyone expected. Robert stopped by my desk one morning, a grin tugging at his mouth. "Pack your bags," he said. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "The CEO wants you to oversee a new client integration. Biggest account we've ever landed. It's in Seattle. 3 months on site. Full travel expenses, executive pay rate. This is the kind of thing people wait their whole careers for." The room seemed to tilt for a moment. 3 months away. I could almost feel the thrill in my chest, but then my mind flashed to Daniel and the fragile progress we'd made. Leaving now could be seen as walking away all over again. That night, over dinner at Grace's, I mentioned the offer. Grace's eyes lit up. "That's amazing, Mom." "You have to take it." Daniel's reaction was quieter. 3 months is a long time, he said, his fork barely moving. I tried to read his face, but it was a mix of caution and something I couldn't quite name. Later, as I was leaving, he walked me to the door. "Look," he began, "I'm not going to tell you not to go, but the kids will miss you. I'll miss you. And I don't want this. Whatever we've started fixing to just fade away." His words caught me off guard. not because they were an objection, but because they carried something we hadn't shared in a long time: vulnerability. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I could hear both voices in my head: Grace's excitement and Daniel's quiet worry. For years, I'd made choices based on guilt or obligation. Now, I wanted to make one based on something else entirely: what would build the life I wanted, without destroying the relationships I still valued. The problem was, I wasn't sure if those two things could exist in the same space. By Monday morning, I had my answer. I walked into Robert's office and said, "I'll take the Seattle project on one condition. I need the flexibility to be home for a long weekend every few weeks." He nodded without hesitation. "Don't. We'll make it work." The decision felt like standing on the edge of a high dive, terrifying but exhilarating. That evening, I called Daniel first. "I'm going," I told him, "but I want us to stay connected. Weekly video calls, the kids can tell me about school, and I'll send something special from every city stop." There was a pause, then a quiet, "Okay, we can try that." Grace was easier.
"Mom, this is huge."
"You're gonna kill it. Send me all the Seattle food pics." The first week in Seattle was a whirlwind: client meetings, strategy sessions, late nights at the hotel with my laptop glowing in the dark. But every Wednesday evening, I carved out an hour for a video call with Daniel and the kids. Oliver would wave Lego creations at the screen. Sophie would read me a paragraph from whatever book she was into. It wasn't the same as being there, but it was something. Then came the first bump. On the third week, our call time came and went without Daniel logging on. I texted, no response. Finally, the next day, he called. "Sorry, Mom. Busy night." Oliver had a meltdown about homework. Sophie was cranky, it just didn't happen. His tone was flat, but I could hear something underneath. Maybe frustration. Maybe fatigue. That night, alone in my hotel room, I stared at the skyline from my window. I thought physical distance might make emotional closeness harder, but I was learning it could also expose the cracks that were already there. If we wanted this bridge between us to hold, both of us would have to walk toward the middle. It was a Thursday night in Seattle, just past 9 p.m., when my phone buzzed. Grace's name lit the screen. "Mom, something's happened. Daniel's in the ER," she said, her voice tight. My chest went cold. What? What happened?" He slipped on the back steps. "This time it's worse. Broken ankle. Maybe a fracture higher up. They're keeping him overnight. The kids are with me right now, but they're scared. Sophie keeps asking for you." I stared at the open laptop on my hotel desk. The presentation I was set to give the next morning to a roomful of executives. This was the make or break meeting for the Seattle project. If I left now, I'd be walking away from months of work and risking the trust Robert and the CEO had placed in me. If I stayed, I'd be doing what Daniel had once accused me of: choosing work over family. I called Robert. When he picked up, I explained in a rush. There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Margaret, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you the team will survive if you have to go. The question is, what's going to matter more to you a month from now?" I didn't sleep that night. By 6 a.m., I was booked on the first flight back to Portland. I left my notes with a junior associate, trusting her to handle the meeting. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it was the only one I could live with. When I walked into Grace's house that afternoon, Sophie ran into my arms so hard I nearly lost my balance. Oliver clung to my coat like he was afraid I'd vanish. Daniel, pale and propped up on the couch, looked at me with something between surprise and relief. "You left the project?" he asked. "I came home," I said simply. In that moment, I realized something important. It wasn't about choosing work or family. It was about choosing what mattered most in the moment, and making peace with the cost. The Monday after I came home, I walked back into the office in Seattle knowing the air would feel different. Robert was at his desk, flipping through a stack of reports. He looked up, offered a small nod. "The team managed. You made the right call." His voice was steady, but I caught the faintest shadow of disappointment. Not anger, just the acknowledgement that I'd chosen a different priority. Later that day, the CEO called me directly. "I respect what you did," she said, "but it's clear this project needs someone who can be fully present on site. We'll transition it to another lead." Her tone was kind but final. I thanked her, hung up, and sat staring at the phone for a long minute. It felt like watching a door close, one I'd worked hard to open. At home, though, the atmosphere was warmer than it had been in years. Daniel called every other day from Grace's place, where he was staying until he could move around on his own. He'd start with updates about his recovery, then slip into questions about my week, my book club, even the little things I'd been doing since I got back. There was no edge in his voice anymore, just curiosity. One evening, as I dropped off groceries for Grace and the kids, Daniel caught me at the door. "Mom," he said quietly, "I know I've given you a hard time these last few years. I didn't always see things from your side. But when you showed up this time, I realized it wasn't because you had to, you wanted to. And that means more than I thought it would." Driving home, I thought about the Seattle project. Yes, I'd lost a career opportunity, but I'd also gained something I wasn't sure I could get back: the beginnings of mutual respect between me and my son. For years, I'd chased their approval by giving up pieces of myself. Now, it seemed that keeping more of myself intact might be the very thing that brought us closer. Daniel's ankle was healing faster than expected, and by mid-February, he was walking with just a brace. One Sunday afternoon, he called and asked, "Want to grab lunch? Just you and me." It was the first time in years he'd invited me out without the kids or a holiday attached. I said yes. We met at a small Italian place I'd always liked, the kind with red checkered tablecloths and bread baskets that never seemed to empty. At first, we stuck to safe topics: the weather, how the kids were doing, a funny story from his physical therapy session. But halfway through the meal, Daniel leaned back, watching me. "You seem different," he said. "Not just because of work, like you're lighter somehow." I set down my fork, thinking about how to answer. "I guess I am," I said slowly. For a long time, I felt like my life was a room with no doors, just everyone else's needs on the walls around me. Then I went back to school, and I realized there are doors. I just never tried to open them. He nodded, his brow furrowing. "I never thought about what it was like for you, Mom. I just assumed you were fine. You were always there." "That's the thing," I said quietly. "I was always there, and I love you for needing me. But being needed isn't the same as being seen." The words hung between us for a moment, heavier than the clink of dishes around us. Daniel looked down at his hands. "So what do you want now? From us?" I smiled faintly. "I don't want you to need me less. I just want you to know me more, not just as Mom, but as a whole person." Something in his expression softened then. Less guilt, more understanding. He reached for the bread basket and pushed it toward me, the tiniest gesture of offering, but it felt like a beginning. Driving home later, I realized this was the conversation I'd been wanting for years. Not an apology, not a dramatic turning point, just the quiet acknowledgement that my life mattered in its own right. Maybe that was the real graduation I'd been working toward all along. It happened at a family gathering I hadn't planned to attend. Grace had invited me to her house for a casual Saturday dinner, saying, "A few cousins are coming by. You should come too." I hesitated, but in the end, I brought a bottle of wine and a lemon tart from the bakery. The evening was warm with conversation until Aunt Lorraine, never one to filter her thoughts, leaned across the table and said, "So, Margaret, I hear you're still running around with that little job of yours. At your age, shouldn't you be slowing down? Spend more time with the grandkids instead of chasing whatever it is you're chasing." Her tone was half smirk, half pity, the kind I'd grown used to brushing off. I opened my mouth to respond, but Daniel spoke first. "Actually, Mom's work isn't little. She's been leading major projects, and she's damn good at it. The room went still for a beat. He didn't stop there. And for the record, she's spent her whole life putting everyone else first. If she wants to spend this chapter doing something for herself, she's earned it. Twice over. Aunt Lorraine blinked, then laughed awkwardly. Well, I didn't mean anything by it. Daniel's voice was calm but firm. Maybe not. But words matter. Then he glanced at me, and for the first time in years, I saw the same look he used to give his kids when he was proud of them. The rest of the evening moved on, but something inside me felt settled. It wasn't just that Daniel defended me. It was that he did it without hesitation, without needing me to explain myself first. For once, I wasn't standing alone. Driving home that night, I thought about the years I'd spent waiting for this kind of moment. It had taken boundaries, uncomfortable conversations, and more than one heartbreak to get here. But now, it seemed we were finally meeting each other as adults. Two people capable of seeing the other fully. It was a quiet Wednesday evening when my phone rang. Daniel's voice came through, softer than usual. "Mom, can we meet for coffee tomorrow? I need your advice on something." The words "need your advice" hung in the air. I couldn't remember the last time he'd asked me for guidance that wasn't about the kids or logistics. We met at a small cafe near his office. He stirred his coffee twice before speaking. "I've been offered a promotion. Bigger salary, more responsibility, but it means moving the family to Denver." I sat back, surprised. "That's a big step." He nodded. "Grace is torn. The kids would have to change schools. And I don't know if I'm making the choice for the right reasons." For the next hour, I listened. Not just as his mother, but as someone who knew what it felt like to weigh personal ambition against the people you love. I told him, "The question isn't just what you'll gain. It's what you're willing to give up, and whether the trade feels worth it when the excitement fades." He was quiet for a while, then said, "That's not what I expected you to say, but it's exactly what I needed to hear." As we stood to leave, Daniel put his hand on my shoulder. "You've been through a lot, Mom, and you've figured out things I'm only just starting to understand. I'm glad you're still here to tell me." It was simple, but it landed deep. For years, I'd wanted my children to see me as more than the one who showed up when they called. Now, for the first time, I felt like they saw me as someone worth calling before they decided. Driving home, I realized this wasn't just a shift in our relationship. It was a quiet rewriting of the roles we'd played for decades. And maybe, just maybe, we were both better for it. A week after our coffee, Daniel called. "I took the Denver job," he said. His tone was steady, but I could hear the mix of nerves and determination underneath. "We're moving in 2 months. The kids are excited." Grace is still wrapping her head around it. "But I think it's the right choice." I smiled into the phone. "Then own it. Every part of it. The good and the hard." He chuckled. "That sounds like something you'd say." "That's because it is," I replied, and we both laughed. 2 weeks later, I went over to help Grace sort through closets for the move. At one point, Daniel pulled me aside in the hallway. "I wanted to tell you that talk we had. It made the difference. I kept hearing your voice in my head, asking if the trade was worth it. And even now, I'm ready for the parts that'll be tough. So, thank you." It was the kind of gratitude you can't fake, quiet, deliberate, and meant to last. The night before they left, the whole family came over for dinner at my place. The kids presented me with a photo album labeled "Home is where Grandma is." Inside were pictures from the past year. My graduation, the Seattle trip, Daniel's recovery, Sunday dinners, even a snapshot of that breadbasket moment at the Italian place. When it was time to say goodbye, Daniel hugged me a little longer than usual. "You know," he said, "I used to think of you as the person who'd always be waiting at home. Now I think of you as someone who's out there living, and I'm proud of that." After they drove away, the house was quiet again. But it wasn't the same kind of quiet I'd felt that night after graduation. Back then, it had been hollow. Now, it was full of memories, of respect, and of the knowledge that even as life changes, some connections grow stronger because you let them. 3 months after Daniel's moved to Denver, the house had found a new rhythm. There were still Wednesday night video calls with the kids. Oliver showing me his science projects, Sophie giving me virtual tours of her new bedroom. Grace sent photos of their weekend hikes in the Rockies, and Daniel would drop me a quick message now and then, thinking of you, Mom. Call soon. At work, things had shifted too. I wasn't leading cross-country projects anymore, but Robert offered me a new role, mentoring younger hires in the firm. It was less travel, more teaching. I realized I loved it. Watching their confidence grow felt almost like watching my own children learn to walk. Except this time, I knew exactly how to step back and let them take the lead. One Saturday afternoon, as I was pruning the roses in my backyard, a package arrived. It was from Denver, a framed photo of me with Daniel and the kids, taken the night before they moved. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. We keep this picture in the living room, so anyone who visits knows exactly who our anchor is. We love you. D. I stood there in the quiet, the sun warm on my face, and felt something settle in me, a peace I hadn't known I was chasing. That evening, I hung the photo in my hallway, not because I needed proof of my place in their lives, but because it reminded me of the long road we'd taken to get here. From the empty seats at my graduation to the moments where we finally saw each other as more than our roles, we'd built something stronger than obligation. I realized then that family isn't about always being in the same place. It's about carrying each other forward, even when the miles stretch between you. And as I locked up for the night, I whispered to the quiet house, I'm still here, and I'm still living. If this journey has taught me anything, it's that boundaries are not walls. They are doors. Doors that let love in, but also keep space for your own life to grow. For years, I thought being a good mother meant showing up for everything, no matter the cost to myself. Now I know that real love is not about how much you give until you're empty. It's about giving from a place where you're full enough to stand tall, even when the people you love don't always understand. Relationships can change. Children grow into adults and parents become people again. People with dreams, ambitions, and the right to be more than the role they've been assigned. When we see each other fully, without the weight of old expectations, that's when love becomes something stronger than duty. So, if you've ever felt taken for granted, remember it's never too late to reclaim your place in your own story. And sometimes, by doing that, you'll find the people you love meeting you in the middle, maybe for the first time. What about you? Have you ever had to set boundaries with family, and did it change the relationship for better or worse? Share your story in the comments. And if this one touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories about resilience, family, and finding your own voice.